Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the Second Amendment. Did you know nearly half of all households have a firearm? This is Christina Williams with Just Criminal Law.
And David Mann, legal storytelling specialist. Well, the Second Amendment is definitely something people talk about quite a bit lately. I didn't know that many people had guns, but what's new about the Second Amendment right now?
Well, I guess the newest thing is a Supreme Court case that's a little bit over a year old, and it was out of New York State. And in New York State, the courts had said that it was okay for the state to determine whether or not to issue a concealed carry permit based on kind of a subjective need of the individual applying. So there wasn't really objective criteria. For example, if the person, could put forth evidence that they had recently had their life threatened, then they could apply and obtain a concealed carry permit. And so the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to go with this subjective test on whether or not someone can apply for and receive a concealed carry. You need objective tests. And those objective criteria need to be founded in some sort of historical reference to the original Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment. And so that was more of a public safety type of argument where, the state of New York felt that it was dangerous for just everyone to carry a concealed weapon, and they wanted, you to jump through some hoops, obtain and pass a background check, but also put forth a subjective reason as to why you needed it. And so the Supreme Court reined that in and said, no, it's okay to have some requirements that are objective for the states, and that right now 21 of the states are actually don't even require a concealed carry. 21 of the states require a concealed carry, and 29 states do not require a concealed carry. So you can anyone can concealed carry. You don't have to have a license. So there are some restrictions on, taking guns outside of your home in states, but for the most part, the Supreme Court just noted that your right to bear arms does not stop at your front door. You have the right to bear arms, and that follows you, out into the community. And so today, we'd like to maybe, David, if it's okay with you, bring on my investigator. And Tony, if you just take a minute and introduce yourself, I'd like to kind of get your perspective.
Sure. My name is Tony Seaman. I'm a retired sergeant and narcotics agent from a sheriff's office here in Wyoming, and I was a cop there for about 23 years, and so I dealt with quite a bit of this kind of stuff over my career.
Right, and so kind of what I would say is noteworthy is you ran into people all day long, every day, that didn't wake up and step out of their house and say, I'm probably going to have to deal with a cop today, right? So you dealt with people who found themselves in situations that they really hadn't necessarily planned on being in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anybody ever plans on that kind of interaction.
Right. And so, it's just kind of along the same line of nobody ever really wakes up in the morning and expects to, need to use their firearm or protect themselves. It's just when you're talking gun laws and your right to own and possess a firearm, it's for self-defense. Obviously, it's also, some people use guns to go hunting and provide for their family. but it's a constitutional right, and nobody ever necessarily expects to need to defend themselves with their gun. But your experience, crazy things happen, right?
Yeah, for sure. And the concealed carry part, I mean, that's almost exclusively carried for the defense of yourself or somebody else.
Right. And we're in Wyoming, and in Wyoming, you don't have to have a permit to carry, right?
Correct.
But in a lot of states, there is a requirement that you do apply for the right to a concealed carry. And can you tell us, maybe if you're familiar a little bit with what people have to do in order to get that permit?
Well, like you said, in Wyoming, there isn't a requirement, so you don't have to, but a lot of people still do. There's an issued certification from the state. As you have to go through a basic background check. They want to make sure that you are not a convicted felon, that you don't have some kind of registered mental illness, or that you are not convicted of any kind of violence that would be related to domestic violence. All of those preclude you potentially of carrying a firearm legally.
Right, and I think you have to take a written test, and some places even require you to take some sort of proficiency test, or your instructor helps you learn to handle and to shoot a gun, right?
Yeah, and I know that at the sheriff's office that I worked at, we did offer some of those classes for citizens. But like you said, it wasn't required, but a lot of people did participate and do that. Okay,
and I mean, when you and I talked about this earlier, I kind of just posed the question to you. Do you think that people should have to, jump through some of these hoops to purchase a firearm or to own a firearm, and that maybe the government should issue some sort of license in order for people to be able to legally own and possess a firearm?
Well, if we're just talking my opinion, personally, I think the only thing that people should have to do is to show that they are not forbidden from carrying a firearm. Like I said, that background check to make sure that somebody is not a convicted felon, which would make it illegal for them to possess a firearm. Past that, I don't believe anybody should have to do anything else. I think that's it. That just make sure that they are legal, they're of age, they're an adult, they're not a convicted felon, and they don't have. There are certain legal things that can preclude you, such as being on probation. One of the hot topics is having a protection order against you. If you have a protection order, then by the federal standards, you are not allowed to be in possession of a firearm. You can own a firearm, but you can't be in possession of one. So a lot of times the people who have a protection order levied against them give their guns away to a family member or a friend for the length of that order. So, but as far as classes go, or a licensing, or to make sure that you have a proficiency test, I mean, personally, I don't believe you should have to do that.
Well, and David, you and I spoke about this some as well, just kind of preparing for this topic, and you kind of have a different outlook or a different perspective on all of this, and you basically think, our framers or the Constitution authors certainly couldn't have thought, we'd be allowed to have the types of firearms we have right now. And, there's some cautionary tales, I guess, that go along with people having firearms and using them in mass shootings and this type of situation. But listening to what Tony said, do you have a counterpoint to that?
Well, I think the thing is I go straight to what is the problem that needs to be addressed? It's because infringing people's rights isn't something no one wants, right? And we have rights, we have constitutional rights. The Second Amendment has also opened up abuse of that. So there's people with guns that are doing lots of sort of mass murders and things like that you don't necessarily see in other countries that have just as many guns or that also have guns. So it's a problem that needs to be addressed, and certain regulations on that I would be in favor of, which does not mean restricting people's guns. It does not mean taking away their guns. It means just stricter restrictions on who can have them, when, under what conditions, or whatever, something that I can't think up on my own right here. I would just be in favor of that in order to solve the larger problem of there being kind of shooting sprees too often.
Right, and it goes back to, I see your point and I see Tony's point, but it is a complicated reining in on a constitutional right. And, we started this conversation with noting that, based on reported polls that half of American households have firearms, and that's not even saying all of them are reporting truthfully. Certainly people don't necessarily want to report to the government that they have firearms. So I would suspect even more than half of the American households have firearms, and it is these exceptions where gun violence occurs. But what kind of statistic is out there that shows that just the fact that a person could potentially have a firearm in their home, does that deter them from being victimized by someone breaking into their home? Certainly, it only makes sense that would deter people from committing crimes against a homeowner, knowing that they very well may come face to face with that homeowner owning a gun and actually being, for the most part, justified if they have to use deadly force when that person unlawfully breaks into their home. So, there's definitely pros and cons, and it's always an interesting debate, but when it comes down to it, it is a constitutional right, and it is something that you should protect, and it can be taken away from you, as Tony noted. If you're convicted of a felony, or if you are involved in a protection order where you're having to respond to an accusation. And so those rights can be taken away from you, and there are circumstances where it's not legal for a person to own a firearm.
Well, this is a big topic that could take many videos to cover. But for now, if someone is facing a crime charge where they are in jeopardy of losing their gun rights, or possibly they need their gun rights restored and they need to have a lawyer handle that, how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. We'll include a link in the description where they can call, text, or chat with a member of my team anytime, day or night. Here at Just Criminal Law, we know you only get one shot at justice, so make yours count.